I'm Kay Foley of This Week with George Stephanopoulos, and I'm joined today by Univision anchor Jorge Ramos. And since we believe all politics is social here at This Week, we're putting some of your questions from Facebook to Jorge.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for joining us
Great
today.
to be here. Gracias.
Oh, gracias. We'll see. Our first one comes from Laura Sabransky, and she says, he is one of the few TV anchors who speaks honestly and forcefully about the realities of our country. Maybe he could talk about his upbringing and how he became this way.
Well, I was born in Mexico City. I'm the first of 4 brothers and my sister Lourdes. And back then in Mexico, when I grew up, it was very difficult to practice journalism because there was a lot of censorship, government censorship. So when I decided to become a journalist, I wanted to be a free journalist. I didn't want to be censored. And that's exactly the reason why I came here to the United States. It makes a lot of sense to be in this country and say the things the way I see them. Otherwise, I would have stayed in Mexico.
Great. We actually had a lot of questions about your path to citizenship here. Was that a difficult process?
It was a long process, and I started as I came as a student, and I thought it was going to be only 1 year. And after 1 year, I got a job at the Univision television station in Los Angeles. After that, I became an anchor, and 1 year has become almost 30 years. Of course, I became a U.S. citizen, and I'm very proud of that. But it was a long, long process. And I can just imagine what happens with those who are undocumented, who come here, and their path is much more difficult than what it was for me. My only desire is that this country treats new immigrants the same way and with the same generosity that it treated me.
Great. Our next question comes from Thomas Nixon, and he says, what American TV anchors did you admire when you were considering a career in broadcasting?
Well, I mean, there were many, but I remember 2 who I always admire. Peter Jennings was the perfect anchor, always in control. He knew what he was talking about. Well-traveled, he could talk the same about the United States than Mexico or about Iraq and Iran. Ted Koppel was fantastic. Ted Koppel, he knew how to that he had to ask the tough questions. And I always like that kind of journalism in which you don't allow anyone just to come here and say whatever he wants. He was tough, to the point, never wavered. I like both of them very much.
Excellent. Daisy Bella Flores asks, will Mexico ever be safe?
Well, right now it's very difficult. We have to remember in the last 6 years with President Felipe Calderón, more than 65,000 people died. And as long as we have a drug war in which the United States is consuming so many drugs, and you have all these drugs coming from Central and South America to the United States through Mexico, it's going to be incredibly difficult for Mexico to be safe. So this is not a problem just for Mexico. This is also a problem for the United States. If the United States has to cooperate with Mexico in that sense, but I don't think it's going to happen very soon, because we have millions of people who are still consuming drugs in this country. And there's a lot of corruption in Mexico. Drug lords are incredibly powerful in Mexico, so it is not a problem that is going to be resolved anytime soon.
It's a much broader issue. Okay. Susan Fabian Chismedia asks, how is the Spanish-speaking community reacting to the language and tone of the GOP? Will all be considered forgiven if Republicans participate in immigration reform?
I think Republicans are finally getting it. After the election, when they realized their candidate didn't get 30% of the Hispanic vote, they understand that really they can't make it without the Hispanic vote. Actually, no one can make it to the White House without the Hispanic vote. And unless Republicans support immigration reform, it's going to be impossible for them to get a high percentage of the Latino vote. So I think Latinos will recognize if they support immigration reform, but if many of them continue rejecting the idea that immigration reform is needed, it's going to be very difficult for them to get the Hispanic vote, and they're going to lose the next election and the next and the next.
Okay, very good. Then our last question comes from Cliff McSparron, who says, though I'm sure his work as an anchor for Univision and host of Al Punto are rewarding and lucrative, has Mr. Ramos considered working for a large English language news organization where his perspectives on Mexico and Latin Americans could reach a wider audience?
Well, I mean, I love what I'm doing right now, but as you know, there's a joint venture with ABC News.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously we're cooperating much more with ABC, so I'm getting the best of both worlds.
Yeah, it'll be exciting to see where that goes.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Gracias, I should say.
Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you for all you that you submitted your questions. Please be sure to follow us on Twitter at ThisWeekABC and like us on Facebook at facebook.com/ThisWeekABC.